I seem to have fallen under the Tamsoft curse as of late. Every other review for the last 6 reviews has been a Tamsoft beat-em-up, and that was not at all on purpose, but what can you do? Today we're going to tackle the black sheep out of Tamsoft's Steam archive, a relatively more realistic title by the name of Onechanbara Z2 Chaos. Let's get started. What the fuck is this story? No, seriously, I have no idea what's going on in this game. As far as I can tell, Onechanbara is a series of games and Z2 Chaos is the last in the line, meaning whatever lore is in this franchise, the developers expect players to already know it before going in. Newcomers do get some intro text that tries to blaze through multiple games worth of story, right before throwing you into a fight that picks up exactly where the previous game left off. I don't really... Okay, I don't know what I'm doing. Hit buttons. Because of this, I feel like many moments that are supposed to be amazing and hype just kinda flew over my head, lacking any sort of context. Pretty early in the game, one of the characters unlocks this super cool transformation, but any impact is lost because I'm so confused over why I'm getting such a power up in stage 1. What the fuck am I looking at? As far as I can tell, without any understanding of the lore, or lack thereof, the story is focused on 2 pairs of sisters, once mortal enemies due to their birth and profession, being forced to work together in order to find out the source of a sudden infestation of zombie-like demons walking the earth. But if we're being honest, story is not the main focus of this franchise. The series started off as the video game equivalent of a B-movie, and despite getting several sequels, it still retains that crazy feel. Our heroines are just as anime as you would expect them to be from a game called Bikini Zombie Slayers, despite the fact that only 2 of them are in bikinis without player interference. Going over our lead characters, we have the undead hunting baneful blood sisters, Aya the beautiful assassin, a calm-minded samurai, and her sister Saki, a hot-blooded grappler. Then you have the vampiric sisters, Kagura, a cocky vampire out to prove she is the best warrior wielding a variety of weapons, and her sister Saya, a somewhat shy vampire content to let her sister take the lead, all while wielding a motherfucking chainsaw. These characters are tons of fun to see in action and even have pretty good English voice acting if you don't like playing the game in native Japanese.
Oh, what the hell's wrong with this chick? Oh, she's serious now. We got a mountain of questions to ask both you and that woman, you know?
Tiny note, unlike Senran and Kagura, they went with simply flipping the languages in the dub when Kagura started shouting out random English to sound cool, rather than dubbing it in French. Visually speaking, the characters try to mix anime aesthetic and outfit designs with somewhat realistic character models and skin textures. Not a big fan of that because it does force my brain to finally acknowledge how stupid some of these outfits are. Outside of the character models, the rest of the game is alarmingly low quality, almost like the funding went only into the gameplay. Wait a minute, that might be true. Or some of the flaws in the game might be intentional to invoke that B-movie feel. I mean, flaws are flaws, you can't exactly sell a house with a broken window and say it's an artistic decision. But I'd be lying if I said it did not throw me back to a time where games were less polished and more experimental. The audio is decidedly not low quality though, when it works, because cutscenes seem to take my audio settings as mere suggestions, and felt that the dialogue could be a little bit quieter.
So, the gang's all here. 2 prideful clans striking a cautious truce.
Hit sounds, in-game dialogue, and especially the music all sound great. The music in particular just pumps you up with all of its high energy tracks and even opens the game with a straight up J-pop song to accompany the fight. Something to look out for though is the resolution of the game. It can kill the visuals if you set it too low. I tried to play the game in windowed mode, slightly under full screen resolution, and the aliasing kinda shit itself, so keep that in mind. Cutscenes themselves are done in a comic book style, with the camera shifting between frames as sounds and dialogue are playing. There are a few cinematic cutscenes at key moments and the start of stages, but don't get used to them. Comic books are the way this game wants to tell its story. That might be a good thing though, as the models clearly look like they were designed with gameplay and still images in mind. When they're conversating in a cutscene, things just look off. To wrap this section up, when I first launched the game, I felt like I had been teleported into an arcade with how all the menus looked, and you can't tell me that this does not look like you are supposed to point a light gun at the screen. The visuals are not that great, particularly in the scenery, looking like my computer gave up rendering halfway through, but the characters and animations, which I'll get into the next section, look fine. Overall, the presentation of the game is great for a B-movie game, but that can't excuse the audio troubles I had during cutscenes. One last thing to note is that I recommend you play this game with a controller. I tried keyboard and mouse, but games like this, they just don't feel right without analog sticks to control the camera and player movements. TLDR for this section, the girls are hot, the music is lit, everything else, let's go on to gameplay. This is the missing piece. Seriously, I've already reviewed 2 other Tamsoft titles and both of them shared okay combat, but something was missing and I found it here. The combat isn't flawless, as I will soon go over, but the game takes the small pool of moves a beat 'em up title normally has and builds the system to complement those attacks, making what could have been a boring trial in how fast you can mash the X button, and turns it into a fun middle point between Musou style beat 'em ups and hyper stylized hack and slash titles like Bayonetta and Devil May Cry. You play as all 4 of the main characters, taking control of one of them with the ability to switch out to the others at any time depending on the order you selected them in at the beginning of the stage. Each character plays moderately different from a gameplay perspective, but are radically different from a thematic perspective, with slow chainsaws, rapid fire punches, chain whips, and good old dual wielding sword combat. The characters each have only a few light and heavy strings, but this is doubled by having a second weapon and extended even further by most of them having a third support weapon with a few unique actions. Clearly, one weapon wasn't enough, and you know what they say.
Use more gun.
The primary string for each character is really long, like 11 actions long, while the heavy strings cap out around 5 to 7 actions, all commendable lengths, but you start the game with only half of that, purchasing extensions to all your attacks as you play. The combos are all super flashy, but it should be noted that the final action in a combo can only be performed if you land a complete, cool combo. This is the most divisive feature in the game, as doing research into this series showed me that the fans are quite split on the cool combo mechanic, and to explain it, let's hit up the training mode. Cool combos are attack strings composed of actions cancelled into each other at precise moments, giving the next attack increased speed, damage, and a glowing white visual effect. Doing this correctly both looks and feels satisfying, but I feel that the window of opportunity for this is quite strict in general, with the exception of Saya's chainsaw combos, and even those fall prey to disjointed cancel opportunities. While generally the cool combo opportunity happens right as a blow's active frames happen, or right as the strike lands for people who don't practice fighting games, many attacks have cancel frames either before or after the swing, throwing visual cues out of the window, and it really sucks to drop a cool combo. Kinda becomes a real damper on the combat if you can't get into the rhythm, and while get good logic is in full effect here, the strictness makes canceling into other actions outside of combos while still maintaining a cool combo difficult to say the least. This is a problem because the freedom of just canceling into anything you want is one of my favorite aspects of this game. Combat is an exercise in creativity where you can smoothly switch characters, dodge attacks, change weapons, all without limit, but good luck holding a cool combo while doing it. As you pummel demons into red paste with all your various tools, you will start to notice your attacks get slower and weaker. This is your weapon slowly but surely getting covered in blood, reducing its effectiveness, and the only way to clean it is to perform a weapon wipe, which has your character take a moment to wave off the blood from their weapon. This makes it so you can't just blitz your way through entire stages without at least some thought into what's going on. And while you would think that taking a moment every 10 or so kills to clean your weapon would get tedious, it is yet another action that can be cancelled into from attacks, making the transition quite smooth. If you feel like you're vulnerable during your weapon cleaning, you can always just switch characters because, surprise surprise, changing characters while they are stuck in an animation does not cancel the previous character's action. Instead, they will continue on with what they are doing and only leave once it's finished. Once again, you can have a lot of creative fun with a feature like this, going into lengthy attacks like supers and then swapping characters to attack during the chaos. Or snapping out of a stun animation by abandoning the restrained character and simply attacking the assailant with someone new. If only there was a game that took advantage of such a feature with such potential. Speaking of supers, all 4 of your characters have 3 supers called ecstasy moves that can be cast after building up a sort of rage gauge, increasing on hit and decreasing during idle. These moves are powerful but not all that flashy compared to the normal attacks the characters are using. Really weird decision. On top of supers, as explained briefly in the story section, oh god, the innuendos are getting infectious. As explained briefly in the story section, the character can transform into a stronger and sexier powered up form that can't be staggered, deal much greater damage, and slowly drains your health. The form looks cool, but does not change any attacks or give you new moves. That's all the big parts of the combat, but there are a few smaller tidbits, and not all of them are good. The jumping in this game is hit or miss. Tapping the jump button will give you a rather inoffensive jump, but pressing the jump button even slightly harder will send your character careening across the screen in either the direction she was facing or towards whatever target you were locked into. This is an awesome mechanic that can actually drag grounded targets into the air ready for a beatdown, but seriously, this action is way too sensitive, and I was getting it even when I just wanted a regular jump to get onto a platform or leap over a fence. Your other mobility option, dodging, is well done. It gives the obvious invincibility frames, but also does not interrupt your combo strings and can be used in the air, so if you are good enough, you can go through entire stages without taking damage. To prevent dying, this game's most powerful tool given to the player is an ability to call in all your friends into the battle simultaneously, controlling all of them at the same time and dogpiling onto your enemies like a pack of wild animals. This is absurdly strong and can slaughter entire rooms of enemies, bosses included, in seconds, especially if you are pulling off cool combos, since the damage and speed buff is given to all the fighters on the field. The only issue with this ability is the activation requiring the same buttons you use to lock on to targets, inevitably throwing off the player for a second or two every single time you use it. All this comes together to create a great core combat system that has its thorns but is so much fun to put into execution. This might be my gold standard for brawlers from now on, and my minimum requirement for hack and slash titles. But this section has gone on long enough, and I've only talked about the fighting without covering any other aspects of the gameplay. So let's move on to the miscellaneous section, and this time I'm covering more gameplay. Well, that was a long section we just came from, but now let's talk about the gameplay that is not all about Tsushima-fying zombies. Don't worry, I'll be brief. The campaign mode is pretty damn short, with only around 10 stages, which aren't even that long. But to compensate for that slightly, the game has a mission mode with plenty of arena style battles, each with their own requirement to complete. It doesn't solve the game's length issue, but does compensate a little. Focusing on the campaign mode, there are some things to note and some things that could be improved. First of all, when the game locks you in a zone requiring you to kill enemies to get out, sometimes a few enemies would end up outside the boundaries. Luckily, they tend to mindlessly charge at the walls, and when they don't, most of the cast has some sort of mid to long range attacks to snipe them. Another issue was that there should have been some sort of tracking of how many enemies are on the field, since multiple times I would kill 99.99% of enemies and be stuck in the area because one single mob probably missing his legs, would be in a corner somewhere. The general mob of enemies are not a problem on the normal difficulty called medium, but if you're playing on a higher difficulty you might need to take advantage of the items in the game in order to get a higher stage rank. If I'm being honest, for a while I didn't even notice there were items, since they drop from enemies in the same fashion as yellow experience orbs, but the game does provide you with the generic damage, defense, and speed ups, some healing items, and items to control the game's unique blood gauges. There were relatively unused during my playthrough, but again on higher difficulties you will probably need them. The bosses are not all that fun to play against sadly, and that comes as somewhat of a surprise since they have these fun QTE moments when you get their HP low enough, showing the girls work together to remove limbs from the target, making it weaker for the remainder of the fight. Even with these moments, it doesn't compensate for the bosses having some very frustrating attack patterns and unshakable stuns. It's not all the boss's fault though, the camera is not the best for fighting giant enemies, and the lock-on just fails in this regard altogether, creating even more of an annoying experience than it already was. But luckily smaller bosses don't have this problem. You can upgrade your team's weapons and give them special rings to boost a character's statistics, but the rings can only be given to one character at a time, so choose carefully. The technique ring in particular is absurdly powerful, almost to the point that it breaks the game because it extends the cool combo window into infinity, so whoever you equipped it to turns into a regular Dynasty Warriors character, just hacking away at enemies as you mash the attack buttons.
Care to play?
As for other side modes, you have the standard gallery mode where you can see the models, hear sound clips, and view various promotional images for the series, the latter of which progressively gets unlocked as you complete challenges in the game. The final mode I want to talk about is the customization mode. Obviously it wouldn't be a fan service game without the ability to customize what everyone was wearing. And in this game the customization is pretty standard, but didn't do anything to make me really want to engage in it. First of all, you need to unlock every single customization option via the challenges, so this mode is more of a completionist reward than something to play around with as you progress through the game. Then there's the fact that you don't get any options to change the colors of the accessories, so even more customization fun is lost. And finally, over the course of playing this game I only got 2 new outfits and 0 hairstyles to select from. I wonder where they are. The overall gameplay, once you remove the combat from the equation, is serviceable, but that's it, and in many ways just barely stumbles past the acceptable mark. It's perfectly fine for an arcade game or a game made in like the PS2 era, which is what this game generally feels like, but now it's about time for me to wrap up this review, so let's move on to my final thoughts. Onechanbara Z2 Chaos is the type of game I would have loved to have played back on the PS2, back when I was younger, but I don't know if it can really measure up to more modern games. You know, things that have awesome side modes, customization options, or detailed story campaigns. The mob combat on its own was fantastic, with only a few visible flaws like the cool combos being rather unforgivable and enemies occasionally bugging outside the arena. Boss combat is frustrating and could have been improved, but I guess that makes it an advantage because they are rather limited compared to fighting mobs. The most disappointing aspect though is the heavy lean on DLC, basically gutting the customization mode in order to make a few bucks on the side. I did have fun though, and at the end, that is the most important question when it comes to video games. So with a price of $39.99, I still have to give this game a borrow plus. The game is only a couple hours long if you just play the campaign, and by then you will know if you personally enjoy the combat enough to want to keep grinding away at those challenge events. 5 or 10 years ago, if I was doing reviews then, this game would have been a straight up buy, but it does feel a bit dated despite me gushing for an entire section about how I enjoyed the combat. If you do decide to buy this game for yourself, I strongly recommend waiting for a deep sale, like 50% off at least, not the 35 you see from most sales these days. But that is just my analysis on this game. If you've ever played this title, leave in the comment section your thoughts on it so a potential buyer can get a second opinion. And as always, thank you for watching this review, and with a special thanks to all my patrons for supporting this content, and I will see you guys next time with the already confirmed Vampire review. Peace!